This week, fire ravages Southern California. Our panel weighs in on the political reaction to the tragedy. President-elect Trump's first cabinet nominee gets grilled on Capitol Hill. And Mark Zuckerberg continues to do an about-face inside the walls of his company Meta. These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome in to this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel. Some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann is our managing editor. Michael Ryan, executive editor. And Valerie Cabana is a media contributor here at The Lion. Panel, welcome to each of you as we dive into the headlines of the week. The big one of the big ones, is the sea change, the corporate sea change, since a new administration is on its way in next week on Monday, the inauguration of Donald Trump. We hear that Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg will be seated at the podium or near Donald Trump up there on the perch, as well as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos will be there. We saw the head of Coca-Cola giving Donald Trump a commemorative bottle of Diet Coke yesterday at Mar-a-Lago. So, Michael, what do you make of all this?
I'm not sure, Chris. Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta and Facebook, has totally reversed course on censorship on Facebook and on DEI policies there. You've never seen a sharper U-turn. I think I'm going to call it about Facebook now. But my question is, does any of this happen if Donald Trump doesn't win an election? It's amazing how some people have changed so drastically with a Trump administration pointed directly at their heads. And by the way, ending censorship means admitting it as well. And as somebody who has been censored on Facebook, I can tell you I'm skeptical about the religion that Mark Zuckerberg is now proclaiming. But we'll see. He does say that it was the big bad Biden administration that made him do it. I'm skeptical about that as well. Besides, Brazil tried this kind of stuff on Elon Musk, and Mr. Musk showed you don't have to sell out to government censorship. But Zuckerberg sold out easily in 2020 and, in fact, paid for the privilege, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to elect liberals in 2020. While censoring conservatives, by the way.
Valerie, is free speech winning, or is this just a guy kissing up to the latest president in power?
That's a great question, and I'm actually curious if this is a change in heart for Mark Zuckerberg or if it is just trying to win favor with the new incoming president, Donald Trump. And we really don't know. We may never know, and some people might have their opinions. Of course, I love to be optimistic and think that he's had a change of heart and he's starting to come to his senses. But free speech is winning because we are voting for the people who are going to ensure that we have free speech. And it is a right in America that we do get to have free speech. And so this is really important. And even Mark Zuckerberg rolling back the DEI policies within his hiring practices, this is a really big deal because a lot of companies are starting to get ahead of the game on this. I don't think that we expected Meta to do the same thing, but here they are. They're rolling back DEI, which, let's get back to merit-based hiring. DEI in itself is discriminatory, and isn't that the one thing that we're trying to get away from? And so if we are able to just keep moving forward and keep pressing, then I think we're headed in a really great direction.
Yeah, Josh, it's an interesting thing that she brings up, not just culturally inside Meta. Mark Zuckerberg announcing that he's going to do away with fact checkers. They're doing away with DEI and some other internal policies. But we've also seen the Washington Post, the LA Times has a new owner. What do you see is going on with big tech, some big traditional media outlets? Are they having a crisis of conscience or something?
I hope so. I don't know how principled some of these folks are. Certainly the wind is blowing in a different direction, and that's a good thing. In that sense, I think free speech is winning. How sincere these people are, I think time will tell. Hopefully this lasts a lot longer than 4 years, but I think a lot of people around the nation, including some important people who are in control of big companies like Elon Musk, realize that free speech is one of the most important rights protected in the Constitution. And so I think it's winning. Zuck and Musk were going to have a big cage match. At one point, they agreed to fight. I don't know if it was going to be on UFC, But it's kind of nice. I think in some sense Musk has already won, and it was a lot more important cage match, and that was one for the freedom of speech.
You know, it's a weird thing, Michael, just to kind of put a bow on this and bringing up the cage fighting thing. You know, Mark Zuckerberg has had 2 really high-profile interviews on Joe Rogan's show, and it's as though Mark Zuckerberg in particular has almost had a personality change. He's gotten into the working out and the cage fighting and the sort of the masculinity thing, the alpha male deal that I think kind of caught on with the Trump election. I don't know, does that have something to do with it?
Well, he even got a perm, too. Yeah. So this looks like a total reinvention.
Yes.
You know, and as an old newspaper guy, let me just propose that one of the big problems with social media censorship is that most of these folks in big tech on social media platforms that have started these platforms, that work at these platforms, that direct these platforms, did not come up through newspapers, did not come up through traditional broadcast, did not go through journalism programs in school. And so they probably aren't as steeped in the First Amendment and free speech as the people who did.
But Josh, DEI is not dead entirely, particularly in higher education, right?
That's right. So we have seen a lot of higher ed schools, basically abandoning their DEI policies, and they also seem to be listening to the wants of their the states that fund them. And in Missouri, the University of Missouri actually has scaled back its own DEI spending and programs, but there is another university here that has not. And so the Lion's been kind of keeping our eye on this and asking why, and it's still a little unclear, but Missouri State University, which is in the southwest part of our state in Springfield, is continuing its spending on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has nearly 20 staff members that it funds at almost $1 million. And they have something called the Inclusive Excellence Institute, which is something that they're trying to build up, but it's very unclear. It's kind of a mystery as to whether it exists yet. But what might be the most alarming thing about it is a description on its website that not only is very poorly written, but it still blares pretty clear Marxist terminology, words like collective work and responsibility, raising social capital. This really isn't surprising to anyone who's looked into these DEI policies. They are rooted in a kind of Marxist approach to life, culture, society. But what we do know is a lot of money is being spent, and there's no sense in which the university seems to want to scale it back.
Yeah, Michael, are we still going to deal with this for a long time to come when we're talking about government institutions, higher education outposts like universities? They seem like they have a death grip on a lot of this woke stuff.
Yeah, and that's, academia is really where it was really nurtured and bloomed since the 1960s. If you read Christopher Rufo's book, America's Cultural Revolution, you'll see exactly how it came about. But it's, the thing is, when you use words like Marxism and Marxist, it sounds overheated, but it's not. Because these things that Josh was talking about are rooted in collectivism, in groups, rather than individuals, which is totally contrary to the founding of America, which is rooted in individuals and individual rights. So it's a very profound decision that we have to make, whether we go forward with that kind of collectivism or we return to America's roots.
And Josh, on the public school front there at the Lion, you've also covered a story about a school choice expert that says, if you want outcomes for public school that are just as great as many Christian schools or private schools, the very simple answer is competition.
That's right. Corey DeAngelis has become well known for his defense of school choice policy, and he's written an op-ed and we've reported on it. It's an argument that's compelling and is becoming familiar, I think, to a lot of people. But what he looks at is that schools are spending more, but less money is going into the classroom. And so while schools have bloated administrations, people in high positions, principals and different superintendents, They're spending lots more money than they used to. Legislatures are giving a lot more money than they used to, appropriating more money than they used to these public schools, and yet teacher salaries have not increased at the same rate. The teacher-to-student ratios are not where you would expect them to be. And so Corey says this is why competition is one of the best ways to root out some of the wasteful spending. You start to have to compete for educational outcomes for kids among families in your school district, and all of a sudden you're going to think twice about hiring that superintendent of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and maybe think a little bit more about academic outcomes.
You know, the exclusivity of many in public school wanting to keep to their zip code, it continues with universities as well, Michael. We were just talking about Missouri State University with their death grip on DEI. Medical schools. I mean, there aren't a lot of top-shelf medical schools in the country, and now you're hearing they're going DEI.
Yeah, and at the same time, airlines in America are abandoning the DEI hiring principles for pilots for obvious reasons. And it seems to me that the same reasons apply when it comes to our future doctors. You really don't want to be educating and inculcating our medical professionals in DEI when you really want just the best doctors available. And, you know, doing this according to race and gender is just a slippery slope that we can't go down. It just seems to me that good medical professionals are good for everyone, and that will take care of itself. You know, it reminds me, we had a story too on the fact that the Minnesota Marathon is offering lower fees for people of certain demographics, okay? It seems like we're going back to the bad old days when race was king, and I think that's a big mistake.
Valerie, just briefly, I wanted to touch on what it looks like Congress is looking at doing with transgender males, girls, boys, sports, however you want to frame it. What are they doing?
Yeah, so the Senate has put a bill on the calendar to talk about banning transgender athletes from women's sports, which keeping men out of women's sports, it's a big deal. However, yesterday, the House actually went ahead and voted. And so they passed it. And so then that will head to the Senate soon. And so we're really getting ahead of the game on this. And once it passes in the Senate, I know that Donald Trump will not hesitate to sign, because if you recall, number 17 on his agenda was keep men out of women's sports. And so as a former female athlete, I can say that it will be a great day once this passes and is signed and is implemented, because it should have happened a long time ago, or you know what, it should have never happened to begin with.
Panel, thank you. When we return, we wade through some of the sound from the week on cable news and on Capitol Hill as the Lion Week in Review rolls on next. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. If you missed any of today's show, or you're interested in all the great news and information that you hear today, be sure to regularly check out The Lion online at readlion.com as we go back to our panel today and check out some of the videos we have from around the horn. We'll start with Mel Gibson. Panel, this was an interesting conversation, you know, with the Southern California fires. Mel Gibson has a unique perspective on this as someone that we also know has become a pretty high-profile public Christian. I wanted you to hear his take on how he sees these fires and get your reaction.
For those of us watching this from afar, try to convey to us the feeling of seeing your home, your neighbors' homes, and the community there at such a loss.
I mean, it's tragic. It makes you really sad. I was actually, there are neighbors I have that I was actually looking at them. I felt worse for them than I did for myself. I look at it as a strange mixture of sadness and almost kind of an elation in a sense that I count my blessings, no matter what. These are things, and they may or may not be replaceable, but they're only things, and we're still here, and I just kind of look at it as almost in a weird kind of way a purification of.
Isn't that interesting? Josh, I wanted to go to you on this only because that got some attention, that he used the word elation. I don't think people probably tried to take a dive into the context of what he was saying there. How about you?
Yeah, I can see why somebody might be critical of that. But, this is a man who has just lost his home. And a lot of the people who lost homes there were wealthy. But even just to take it for what it is, he's just lost a lot of his possessions, some of which aren't replaceable. Things like photographs, things that, mean a lot to a person. And so he was reflecting, it seems to me, on his own personal sense of loss, but that he saw a silver lining in that actually it made him reconsider how important are these things in my life, and they're not the most important thing. To me, that's a really central Christian perspective to have on life, where Jesus had told his own followers to be careful where they put their treasure, because and not to treasure the things that moth and rust destroy, but rather the things that are eternal. And so it seems to me like maybe Mel Gibson was thinking about that.
That's how I took it, Michael. I remember sitting in a sermon once, and a pastor who was talking about all of the works that he'd done in college and seminary, all the books and all the papers that he'd kept, and he realized that wasn't a place he wanted to be anymore, and he'd purged a lot of that from his office. And I had never really thought about that before, but I think that's what Gibson was saying there.
Yeah, and I think people out here in the hinterland just really appreciate seeing common sense emanating from Hollywood. It's not normally what you see, actually, especially at the award shows. So it's really refreshing to see people like Mel Gibson coming forth with this kind of common sense. And it's also interesting to see how so many leftists and celebrities in that part of the country have come face to face now with disaster and disaster from bad leadership. And I hear the screams and cries from so many people who are still without homes or shelter, for that matter, in North Carolina, saying, hey, what about us?
And Valerie, to that point, I don't know if you've heard Adam Carolla's rant on this. A lot of people on the left who are celebrities, he's not one of those, and he wonders if this is going to get their attention. I'd like you to listen to this and then react on the other side.
You guys all voted for Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles. You all voted for Gavin Newsom. And now you get what you get. Oh, now that your house is on fire, well, now you're thinking about something else. Now you want to know what's going on. What's going on around here? All these people who were deep blue Democrats are now going to have to pull a permit to rebuild. And when they start running into the bureaucracy and the red tape, they're going to start going nuts, and they're going to vote for Rick Caruso next time because they want to get. That's all Trump says is we're going to pull back the regulations.
Valerie, your reaction?
Yeah, so it's really unfortunate that something so devastating had to happen for people to wake up. But here's the thing, lifelong Democrats are waking up and they're seeing what's happening. I think that Democrat politicians think that people are dumb, but they're not. And once they're able to see things with their own eyes and not the eyes of a politician, then they're really going to start understanding what's happening. And like he said, they're going to vote differently.
Scott Jennings over at CNN, he's gotten a lot of attention for being sort of the counter voice to a lot of the left on CNN. And he talked about the way governors handle emergencies. Ron DeSantis versus Gavin Newsom. Take a listen.
I do think there's a split screen here, too, with Florida, to be honest. A lot of what we talk about it in terms of emergency management in this country almost always comes from hurricanes and weather. And who is the recognized best emergency manager in the country? Ron DeSantis in Florida. So Newsom is also, he's under assault from Trump a little bit, but he's also dealing with, I think, a comparative here. What do other governors do? Is he as good? So when you talk about the future politics of it, is he as good at this as another governor might be? Could be a real problem for him because right now I think people have serious questions and there are no answers yet. He'll have a chance to answer them, but it doesn't look great right now.
Josh, this is a test of governors, of leadership. This is, back to the state level. We talk about education a lot on this show. Emergency management is certainly flashier than education, but it's one and the same when you talk about statewide leadership.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think it's a great comparison. For one thing, these two have been politically compared for a few years now, as there's been speculation about them being presidential contenders in the future, even at one point, maybe in this last election. I think it's also DeSantis, when you look at some of the recent hurricanes that he prepared for, it's amazing how out front they are, how far out ahead they get of it, how clear he is from his press releases and from his press appearances. clearly they've got it down in Florida. And when you look at the policies that he's pushed, the strong leadership that he's pushed, deregulation, I think it is a blueprint, and Newsom has a lot to learn.
Michael, your reaction on the other side of this clip from Jon Karl of ABC News, who drops a rather interesting truth bomb about all of the indictments in lawfare against Donald Trump. Listen.
You know, it's a pretty complicated, tawdry set of, and you think that's the thing that he went on trial for, but not what you spent all your time investigating.
Yes, a little bit.
How much of a problem? Because, frankly, a fair observer could look at that New York case and say, why is this even being prosecuted?
Michael, your reaction to that?
Where was he before November 5th? That's my question.
Yeah.
It's so obvious to any fair observer, as he calls it, that so much of this, if not all of it, was politically motivated. Every one of these prosecutors and even some of the judges involved in the lawfare against Trump are political partisans. And there's evidence that some of them were in the White House at one time or another. So, where were these people before the election?
Now we turn to the, in my opinion, most interesting part of the week, and that's the confirmation hearings underway in Washington, D.C. Pete Hegseth was up first, new Secretary of Defense nominee by Donald Trump. That's his pick. Markwayne Mullin, senator from Oklahoma. Panel, I want you to hear what he had to say to his colleagues, the Democrats, who were roasting Pete Hegseth about his personal life. Take a listen.
Senator Kaine, or I guess I better use the senator from Virginia, starts bringing up the fact that what if you showed up drunk to your job? How many senators have showed up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it, because I know you have. And then how many senators do you know have got a divorce before cheating on their wives? Did you ask them to step down? No. But it's for show. You guys make sure you make a big show and point out the hypocrisy because a man's made a mistake.
Michael, there was virtually no questions from the left on this panel about the military, about our defense needs. It was all about his personal life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know the Constitution calls for it, but it's interesting to me to see so many people in Congress, in the Senate, living in glass houses, sitting in judgment of people that come before them when they really have no business doing that. And I think, senators showing up drunk to vote, that's a story. I think we need to follow up on that, find out, and I'd like some names, actually, of people who are doing that. I didn't see any arms going up, but I imagine it hit some people right across the bow.
Yeah. And Josh, is it disqualifying? Let's talk about it for a minute. I know we're all Christians. We all fall, in this room anyway, we all fall short of the glory of God. We're all sinners. Pete Hegseth's personal life, his failings, he says he's saved by Christ, but yeah, he admits it. He made some personal mistakes. Is he disqualified for being the Secretary of Defense because of it?
No, I don't think necessarily that someone's past mistakes disqualifies them for a job. I think you would take each situation, individually, and you have to consider how long has it been? How long have they been recovered from those maybe bad habits? And that would be bipartisan. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. Maybe you made some mistakes, but maybe you're better now. So you have to look at their track record. You have to look at things like that. And then from a Christian perspective, I think it's important to know why somebody says they've changed. And clearly he has religious convictions, Christian convictions for why he's changed. And so I think that is also important to consider.
Panel, thank you. Coming up next on the Lion Week in Review, our panel picks the story of the week, the ones they say you can't miss. Stay tuned. That's next. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. As we wrap up, we always like to ask the panel, those who contribute at readlion.com, their favorite stories of the week. We start with Josh Mann.
Well, this is one of the most significant to me, and that is what we talked about earlier about Zuckerberg, his interview with Joe Rogan. One of the things that came out of that, which we already knew, but I'm not sure we knew the extent of, was how much pressure the Biden administration put on Meta, on Facebook especially, to censor speech that it didn't like. Now, I want you to hear that again. The government of the United States of America pressured a company whose users include most Americans to censor speech that the government didn't like. That doesn't sound like it's even possible in a country with a constitution like ours, with our history, but it happened. And he's there admitting it to the world that it happened. Now, he bears some blame because he was the captain of that ship, but that is chilling to know that our government was willing to do it. And at the time, although there were suspicions that it was happening, it was largely they were trying to do it in secret. And so we have to make sure that doesn't happen, and we have to be vigilant.
Valerie, your favorite of the week.
Yep, gonna rewind to the Senate proposing a bill to ban transgender athletes. I think this is so important, and I'm really glad that the House went ahead and got a head start, because as a former female athlete, like I've already said, I couldn't have imagined playing volleyball against a boy that could have killed me with the spike of a ball. That's just absolutely ridiculous. And so this is an important issue that's dear to my heart. And so I'm really glad that the ball is rolling.
Yeah, and it's an interesting time, too, because you have your first transgender member of Congress who's been reading to school children, but that'll wait for another show. Michael, let's turn to you. Your favorite story of the week.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and have two.
Okay.
Because I can, and
sure,
you can't do anything about it. One is a story we have, school choice legislation, first bill introduced in Idaho House this year. School choice is so hot in lawmaking all over the country. Neither lawmakers nor parents can wait to get education freedom out there. It is the issue of our time going forward. It is the civil rights struggle of our time. But I think one of the hotter issues in the past few years has been government censorship through social media. And we really didn't get to the nub of it because the lawsuit, Missouri v. Biden, that went up to the Supreme Court as Murphy v. Missouri, was thrown down to the courts and mostly done away with because the Supreme Court didn't want to deal with it. They said the states had no standing to do anything with it, and we'd know a lot more about it, and it'd be a much bigger issue if the Supreme Court had acted on it.
And that'll do it for this week's edition of the Lion Week in Review. Be sure to keep up to date on all the latest news, these stories, and so much more at readlion.com. And again, if you missed any of today's show, check it out on YouTube. For all of us here at the Lion, thanks for downloading the show, and we'll see you next week.